Tom Beahon, founder of performance wear brand Castore, along with his brother Phil, are sports mad. Both tried and failed to be professional athletes before brainstorming together day after day and night after night how they would become successful some other way. In today's pod, Tom talks about the journey they've both been on, from the seed of an idea to Castore becoming the UK's fastest growing fashion retailer.
Nike, Adidas have dominated this market forever. Why has no one ever challenged them? Your dreams of your life up until that point kind of disintegrate before your eyes. Taking the time to find out what it is that you genuinely love and are truly passionate about is the singular most important thing that any person, young or old, can do.
But that feels like quite an outlier mindset to have. Have you always felt like that through life?
Again, that combination of love of what you do and a point to prove, it can be pretty potent when put together.
That must have been like a proper pinch yourself moment.
Yeah, that for me is probably the singular factor that separates the good or the very good from the great. And lo and behold, whatever it was, 4, 5, 6 years later, you kind of sat on centre court and Andy Murray's wearing your logo, playing in front of how many people at Wimbledon, and you're like, wow, how the hell did that happen?
Tom, I want to start off by saying, first of all, congratulations, because everywhere I read in the papers, you guys are going great guns and doing great things with your business, which is brilliant. And we're going to delve into that a lot over the course of the next half an hour. But first, let's sort of track back. And when I ask you for your moment in time, I imagine it's going to be related to the business. But when did that moment happen for you where you thought this could be defining, this could take us in a whole other direction?
No, it's great to be here, Georgie. Thank you so much for having me on. So, really appreciate the kind words, and I completely understand why you would think that my moments would relate to the business in Castore. But actually, when I was thinking about it in advance of coming on, the big moment for me relates to a period earlier than that. And my background, I'm born and raised in Merseyside, and pretty much every young kid born and raised in Merseyside wants to be one of two things: either a musician, because of course we're the home to the Beatles in Liverpool, or a sports person. And I was no different. So my sport was football. Unfortunately for me, I wasn't blessed with the talent by the man or woman upstairs to play for Liverpool or Everton, the top teams in Merseyside. So I played for the mighty Tranmere Rovers, who are slightly lower down, but very
Still
much
a
had
good
big
football
dreams.
team.
What I always say to my friends, Georgie, is that I was paid to play football at the age of 17. So, like life could be a lot worse. But I grew up wanting to be a professional footballer. That was all I'd ever wanted to do, all I'd ever dreamt about. I had kind of a distinctly tunnel vision focus about achieving that. And at the age of, I was trying to remember this yesterday, it was either 19 or 20. I got called into the manager's office, and this happens to thousands and thousands of kids every year. You get told, unfortunately, we're not going to renew your contract, and it was at that point that, like, without sounding dramatic, but it is pretty accurate. Literally, your life and your dreams up until that point, and you're not really a fully formed adult either at 19. You're fully your dreams of your life up until that point kind of disintegrate before your eyes. And I'm kind of not too proud or embarrassed to admit that when I left that meeting room, I did have more than a few tears in my eyes. I'm at my biggest. It's funny kind of how your brain works in those moments, but my biggest kind of fear was, what the hell am I going to tell my dad? Because my dad had been the guy that would drive me to training every Tuesday and Thursday from the age of 7 onwards, would kind of pick you up at whether you'd been in Preston or Rochdale or Blackpool or Carlisle or anywhere in between, was always there to support and cajole and challenge and criticize every now and then and all the rest of it. And I was like, how the hell am I going to tell him? He's going to be as devastated about me as this. But what, and forgive the cliche, this risk sounding cliched, but it is the genuine truth in my experience. What genuinely was the hardest moment in my life up until that point. And I do also think for those thousands of young people that go through a similar moment every year, it can be a moment that you don't recover from. And you say, okay, well, I'm not going to make it as a professional footballer. I'm now not going to put myself outside of my comfort zone. I've failed in inverted commas because that is very much what it feels like when you go through it. Whatever I do next, I'm not going to put myself in a position when where I can fail. Uh, but luckily for me, thankfully, and this didn't happen immediately. Of course, I felt very sorry for myself for a not insignificant period of time. But that moment, undoubtedly, on reflection, looking back at it 15 plus years later, that was the moment that kind of put the inner steel inside of me that said, I'm not going to let this be the defining moment of my life. I'm going to go on and do something else. And that really was where the embryo for Castore was born.
Isn't it interesting? So many successful people often point to a moment of perceived failure as the thing that has absolutely kick-started the journey to success. How did you find your confidence after that moment? Like you say, you talk very eloquently about the fact that for a lot of young people out there, they can't come back from that. They can't recover from that. And that affects their decisions moving forward. How did you sort of find the confidence to put that to the back of your mind and crack on with something ambitious?
Yeah, it's a great question, Georgie, and it's funny. I was listening to something recently by an author called Michael Lewis, super successful, he'd written a lot of financial related books, and he talked about the concept, which I definitely won't describe as well as him, but basically understanding how fortunate we are in life. So whatever's happened to us, actually to be born in the UK straight away, we're more fortunate than many people in the world. To be born with two parents that love and care about you, you're far more important than many people. And I definitely was incredibly lucky, and am to this day, to have a super supportive family network. And I think realizing that, having the self-awareness, which is not necessarily an easy thing to do when you're kind of late teens, early 20s, that I have this amazing support that is a privilege and something that a lot of people don't have. And again, it undoubtedly takes you a little bit of time to get over it, and you do spend a bit of time feeling sorry for yourself. But when you have that support network and people that care about you, and you try and have a bit of self awareness, you do realize the sun is still going to rise tomorrow. Whatever's happened to me in my little world, and might seem like the most important thing in the world at this moment in time, really isn't that important. And you kind of slowly again over time realize that, do you know what, I've learned quite a few skills there that even if they haven't proven again successful in inverted commas in that particular situation, and it didn't give me exactly what I wanted to be a professional footballer, I have still learned how to compete in a pretty results driven, highly competitive environment. I have learned to be part of a team and communication skills and all these kind of things. So slowly over time, it's not kind of this one light bulb moment where you say, right, brilliant, I'm not a footballer, I'm going to be an entrepreneur instead. But you kind of do slowly make that transition away from feeling sorry for yourself towards, actually, I do have, certainly the way I positioned it in my own mind, I've got a competitive advantage. I'm not starting from 0. I'm starting from 1. I'm ahead of most other people because I know what failure is. I've looked failure in the eye and I've dealt with it. As an entrepreneur, you're gonna deal with failure. I already know that. So I'm ahead of most people. And again, whether it's just a mental trick that you play on yourself to kind of drive motivation to achieve whatever's next. But I do remember going through that period afterwards of saying, I'm not going to let this failure in football define me. I'm actually going to use it as a positive to help me do whatever's next. And again, over time, I'm very lucky. I've got a brother who equally wanted to start a business, but it was that, as you described it, so-called failure that germinated into, do you know what, this is not only just going to not be a negative, it's going to be a positive.
What also about the love of sport? You know, I think about a lot of broadcasters, a lot of journalists who commentate on sport, who talk about sport for a living, and most of them are sort of people that wish they'd been participating on the field of play. Most of them wish they'd been holding that racket at Wimbledon or whatever it might be at playing at Twickenham. You know, many of them are failed athletes in some regard. But they absolutely have a burning love of sport. Is that feels to me like that's also your story? Is does that ring true for you?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And there's one additional piece. So on the love of sport, to take that first, to start a business, and I think this is true to be kind of very successful in any facet of life, you have to love it. It can't be work. There will be so many setbacks and challenges and moments in the journey where even if it's not quite as dramatic as quit and you just give up, but settle and say, okay, yeah, we're kind of fine here. And I mean, we're a far different bit. Castore is a far different business now versus even as recently as 3 or 4 years ago. And of course, you're faced with different challenges. One of the ones that no one ever talks about, but I think is incredibly prevalent, and the UK needs kind of entrepreneurs that have this growth mindset. But it becomes really easy to settle for what you have. You have something to lose at the start. You don't have anything to lose, so in a really strange way, it's easier because you're just like, right, that's where we've got to go. We ain't stopping until we get there. I don't really know where there is, but it's going to be better than we are here. So I just need to move forward. It's forward momentum or die, grow or die. And that was the mindset at the beginning. But now we've got kind of 500 staff, 250 million quid revenue, give or take. There's a lot of great things, but then actually that next risk, do you want to go and expand into that market? Do you want to go and launch that new product? And if it doesn't work, there's going to be consequences beyond just us as two kind of 20 odd year olds, which we were when we started the business, it not working out. And in a strange way, that challenge is almost as big, if not even bigger than being at the start and saying, well, yeah, let's just get this thing going and see where we end up. So as you go through this journey, so many challenges, so many hardships and setbacks and difficulties. I personally, and people may disagree, and you may disagree, Georgie, the singular thing that keeps you going through all of that is you have to love it. I love sport. It's not a job to me. I get to go to football, rugby, cricket, Formula One races, tennis matches, the sailing, and I'm like, wow, I get paid for this. This is a so-called job. That isn't a job for me. So whether the revenue goes to X or Y or the profit does, yes, you want to be as successful and build the most successful business commercially, but whatever we're doing, I'm making sports kit that's worn by elite athletes. Oh my God, that is beyond a dream. So that love for doing what you do is the singular thing personally that is going to define how successful you are in life, and taking the time to find out what it is that you genuinely love and are truly passionate about is the singular most important thing that any person, young or old, can do. So I think that's incredibly important. But the second one, which just sparked in my mind, Georgie, from what you said about kind of failed athletes going on to achieve other things, is that I think you have something to prove. You've got a little bit of a chip on your shoulder. You don't necessarily want to take the same path that everyone else does. And I remember after I'd stopped playing football, kind of my parents were like, "Oh, why don't you go off to university?" And again, I don't know what it was, but I just remember thinking, no, I'm not going to do what everyone else does. I want to go off and kind of forge my own path. And I remember saying to myself around that time that I'm going to leave Merseyside and I'm not coming back until I'm successful. I don't know what success is. I don't know how I'm going to define it, but I am not coming home. I've failed at football. I'm not going to fail again. I'm not coming home until I've been successful. So whether that's competitive spirit, I don't know what it is, but that failure, personally, I think it kind of puts something deep inside your soul or your spirit that says, I'm not going through that again. I'm going to prove to myself, to the world. And it's crazy, right? Because no one gives a shit that you didn't make it. Sorry for my language. No one cares that you didn't make it. So you're not proving it to anyone else, but in your head, you're proving it to the world that I can be successful. That failure is not going to define me. And again, that combination of love of what you do and a point to prove, it can be pretty potent when put together.
Have you read Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers? It feels like also sort of do you consider yourself an outlier in your you said when you think growing up doing the Tranmere Rovers thing and a love of sport and everything else and having a tunnel vision focus on being a footballer and then that not happening. Not many kids would sort of dust themselves down from that and then say, "Right, I'm going to go and build this clothing brand." Whatever that looks like. At that time you can't tell obviously that it's going to turn into this mega business. But that feels like quite an outlier mindset to have. Have you always felt like that through life?
Yeah, yeah, okay, it's another great question, and I think the answer is yes, but I also, Georgie, think that it links to the luck point, and I think Bill Gates, isn't he, is cited in that book, and he was incredibly fortunate to grow up in a part of the world where computers just happened to start, and he was incredibly lucky to have a family that said, "Brilliant, young William, you go off and spend your evenings playing with those computers and working it out." Like, and again, it would take a far bigger brain than mine, Georgie. Is that fate? Is that destiny? Is that pure good luck and coincidence? Is that somewhere in between? I don't know, but yeah, the outlier concept I think is incredibly interesting, and how opportunities and situations present themselves in life. Of course, there's also an element of you make your own luck. I am a big believer in if you put positivity and good good, positive mindset out into the world, by and large, and that's not to say it's gonna be a seamless journey, but by and large, you do get positivity back, and equally, the reverse is true, that we probably all have met people, haven't we, that are down in the dumps. There's always something to be unhappy about, there's always something that's gone wrong, and of course, many people have legitimate reasons to feel that way. But my very simple philosophy on life, and I'm not sure anyone's going to be writing a book about this anytime soon, but it's kind of twofold. One, if I'm healthy, and secondly, if my family are healthy, you really don't have anything else to complain about in life. So go off and do your best and see what you can make of yourself. But there's another kind of part of that, Georgie, which I think plays to the outliers theme, which my biggest fear, and it's been the case ever since I wanted to be a footballer, and since we started Castore and as we've grown. But my biggest fear wasn't ever failure. Ironically, it wasn't like, oh, can I make it as a footballer? And now I'm not going to be a footballer. What am I going to do? How am I going to make a living? Am I going to be able to support my family? Because I always thought, okay, I've got half a brain in my head, and I seem to have this capacity to work quite hard. I'll be okay. Whatever it is, I'll kind of be okay. My biggest fear was mediocrity, and just this idea that you could, well, rephrase that. What's the difference between someone like, whether it's you in your career or Ben in his, that goes right to the very pinnacle, and someone that's kind of okay, pretty talented, pretty capable, but incapable of taking that next step? And my biggest fear was having some talent, having some capability, but not, for whatever reason, been able to take that next step and trying to become really, really good at whatever it is that you do. And I don't think there's any single factor that separates people that are genuinely world class. And I don't think I'm in that category yet, unfortunately. Let's see where we get to in the years ahead. But the world class people, from the quite good to the very good people, I don't know. And you may have your own views. Spent quite a fair bit of time thinking about it, and the single factor of all the kind of super successful people I've met that I can kind of draw on in terms of separates the very best from everyone else, is there's a level of intensity that other people don't have. They just have that drive to get it done, to push that deal through, to make that thing happen. That a lot of people are saying, "No, are you sure about that? There's a risk here, or you might fail, or are you sure you can win the America's Cup? What happens if?" Well, I'm just going to drive it through. I'm going to make it happen, and yeah, that for me is probably the singular factor that separates the good or the very good from the great.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It's almost like a complete bloody mindedness, which most people, sort of 85% in, would go, okay, well, we're tapped out now. We've reached the ceiling on what we think is probably possible here, but they just keep on going. And I definitely see that in my husband in terms of a sportsman and what they're like about that for sure. But what about in terms of, because I've seen Ben as well go through this transition phase of being a professional athlete and then having to morph into a CEO and having to run a business. And that's been a massive transition. And athletes everywhere will be looking at, various different ways in which they can also have a second career. And that's basically what he's doing. How have you navigated the business world? How have you what have you learned on that journey? Because when you guys started out, very different thing to where you are now. How have you sort of navigated that and made sure that you've, kept up to pace with where you need to be in order to take the business to its next place?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And the short and honest answer is with difficulty, because it isn't easy. And although there's some kind of parallel skill sets in terms of the competitiveness and the teamwork and communication, all of those things that you can kind of translate from sport to business, equally there's a whole load of stuff that is completely different, and you do just have to work it out as you go along. So again, in our industry, and we're lucky that we work in sports, but doing a partnership deal in football is very different from doing one in rugby, is very different from doing something in Formula One. Dealing with a Chinese manufacturer is very different from dealing with an American distribution partner. So I don't think you can learn any of that in university. So to pick up on your example, Georgie, you can learn about it practically, of course, and you can read textbooks, but for any athlete or someone that's changing career and has been in one world and is now coming into the business world, I truly believe this. None of this is unlearnable. Like, this is not, none of these problems are insolvable. You can work it all out. There's a couple of probably core characteristics that will really help. The first, as simple as it sounds, is authenticity. If you're an athlete, be an athlete. If you love sport, be that person. Don't try and be someone else. Don't try and be this buttoned up, politically correct, traditional business person if that's not you, because you're just going to come across like a bit of an idiot. And even if you can play the role well, at some point the mask will slip, probably when you're under pressure, and it will come across, and it won't look very good. So if you are an athlete transitioning into sport, be that. That makes you different. That makes you stand out. If you're an actress, an influencer, whatever it is, be that person. I promise you, there'll be a hell of a lot of so-called traditional business people that will be incredibly jealous of the experience and skill set that you have. So lean into that. Be authentically yourself, as cliched again as that may sound. That would be the first piece that I'd say. The second one I think is completely true, no matter what your background, but particularly if you're making that transition as I did, and as no doubt others are or thinking about, and that's you've got to have integrity. So whether it's in sport or business, genuinely your biggest asset isn't financial. It's not going to be a loan from the bank. It's not going to be some seed capital to get you going. Your biggest asset will be your relationships. And if I think back to how we started Castore, I mean, we've never stopped doing this, to be honest. So it's 8 years and counting, but we spent 18 months relentlessly just knocking on doors and saying, with these two young guys, we've got this vision of starting a British sportswear brand. Is there any advice you can give us? Is there anyone you can, because we didn't know anything. We didn't know how to design a product. We didn't know how to build a website. I couldn't tell you whether sportswear was manufactured in China or Cambodia or Bangladesh or Portugal or anywhere in between. But people will tell you if they can see that you're authentic and you're passionate about what you're doing, that people are willing to help you. But you need to put yourself out there. You need to be honest about what you know, what you don't know. But that kind of relentless curiosity is probably the right word, to learn, to develop, to build relationships is an incredibly powerful asset, and that's still true now, 8 years on, as much as it was at the very beginning. But the transition I don't think there's a playbook that you can follow. You need to be yourself. You need to have a lot of passion for what it is that you're doing. But I do always remember looking back, Georgie, how surprised I was. Some super so-called high-powered, high-profile people will take your call, will have a coffee with you, but you've got to put yourself out there. No one's going to do it for you. You have to do it yourself.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? That's so very, very, very real that that is the case, and it's just about, like you say, it takes you back to kind of the early days of trying to sort of scrape by on whatever you were doing. I remember doing show reels and sending them out to every single television company I could think of and knocking on all those doors. And it's the same thing again. It's just amplified or with more money at stake. Where did you and your brother, when you first discussed sort of what you wanted to do together, was it an immediate thing? You knew instantly you wanted to start a clothing sportswear brand together, or was there something else first? Or how did it even happen that you two went, this is what we want to do?
I know. I wish it was that easy. So again, I'll happily embarrass myself for the podcast audience, Georgie. But so my brother and I, we knew that we wanted to start a business. I, I have no idea where that came from because there's no entrepreneurial background in the family. Our mum's a teacher. Our dad worked in construction. I think if I had to kind of pinpoint it what, as we alluded to earlier, it was the fact that we'd both been through a similar experience of wanting to be professional athletes and not quite making it. So we both had that kind of drive and passion and intensity, but also that kind of chip on our shoulder. So saying, okay, we're going to prove those people wrong, those people that didn't offer us a contract. The best way to do that is starting our own business. I think I'll be honest, it wasn't something that we kind of sat down and debated at a deep psychological level at the time. It was like, shit, we've got no money. What the hell are we going to do with our lives? But it was we're very close family growing up. Phil and I were close growing up, so it happened very organically, I guess. Um, but it really just built momentum. There wasn't this kind of big light bulb moment. We were both living because, as I said, I'd made a decision. I'm moving away from Merseyside, and I'm not coming back until I've made it. So we moved down to London. We didn't have any money, so we both had to get jobs. We were living in this tiny little kind of flat together in a tower block in a not very nice postcode, and we'd have to leave at 8 a.m. every day to go to work, but we'd get up at 5 a.m. and kind of spitball ideas and think about what we could do, and then we'd get back at 6 p.m. and stay up till 9 p.m. and do exactly the same, and just over time, it kind of built organically. But the bright idea that I had, and I had 100% conviction on this, that it was a game-changing Amazon-esque idea, that I was gonna launch an après ski brand. I'd never been skiing in my life up until that point, so where this idea came from, I don't know, but I was like, "Yeah, that's a great idea. You're gonna launch this kind of Moncler-esque premium high quality après ski." And my brother was like, "Oh, that's a great idea, other than the fact that what the hell are you gonna do for the 10 months of the year that it's not the ski season?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, that's quite a good point. You might be onto something there." But it really, the Castore, we knew that we both love sport. That was the thing that we were super passionate about. And it kind of evolved over time where we said Nike, Adidas have dominated this market forever. Why has no one ever challenged them? So kind of the David v Goliath mindset, a little bit of ignorance is bliss. If we're gonna do something, let's do something that we love. Even if we fail, we're gonna have some fun doing it. Wouldn't it be amazing if one day athletes wear our products when they're competing? And that kind of it built from there. And lo and behold, whatever it was, 4, 5, 6 years later, you kind of sat on centre court and Andy Murray's wearing your logo, playing in front of how many people at Wimbledon, and you're like, wow, how the hell did that happen?
Just tell me what that felt like, though, for you two boys, like you say, with your backgrounds and the love of sport and, playing almost professionally and everything else. That must have been like a proper pinch yourself moment with Andy on centre court wearing a Castore piece of kit. And then also you're like, servicing the England cricket team and Premier League football teams. I mean, it must be a moment where you both like come back in the car from a meeting and go, holy shit, we've actually really pulled this off.
Sure, that's so again, 2 parts to that, Georgie. The first one is, yes, that it's genuinely, truly hair on the back of the neck, stand up. I remember actually, so I say Wimbledon, the first time Andy played wearing Castore was at the Australia Open, and we pretty much used all of the money. This is not an exaggeration, like all of the money that we had, because we very, very little money at this time. We'd done this deal with Andy where he'd become an investor in the business. Again, fair play to him. There's not a lot of people that would have done that. Good on him. It shows the intelligence and foresight of Andy. And he obviously believed in us, which we massively appreciate. But we had very little money. We spent that money on 2 plane tickets well, 3 actually, 'cause we bought our operations director at the time to go over to Melbourne, and I was sat next to Judy Murray, and it was one of these moments from I was trying to text my mum without Judy saying, like, "Mum, I'm sat next to Judy Murray." She offered me some fudge as well, which is very nice. It's funny what your brain remembers. But we were sat there watching him in at the Australia Open first round. He'd had problems with his hip, so it was all very emotive. And it was just one of those, it will stay with me forever. I actually think he looked very good in the kit. We had him in this kind of navy white combination, which he looked very good in. And that was the moment, Georgie, that you're like, wow, we've achieved something here. That was pretty cool. There is an additional part of it, which is we're a digital business. We generate the majority of our revenues online, and you have an app on your phone so you can see how much revenue it was then a single website, and now we've got quite a few different websites that we operate, but you can see all of the revenue
Yeah.
that the business is generating in live real time. And that was the one moment that you saw that kind of
The
genuine
spike.
spike, and I was like, "Wow, this stuff works. This isn't something that they just tell you about in school." Kind of athlete marketing, sports marketing is a real thing, and I saw it with my own eyes, and we were like, "Okay, yeah, this works. Well, maybe we should think about doing a few more of these things." So the Andy moment was definitely special, and we've been super lucky. England at the Ashes, Rangers winning the Scottish Premiership, Red Bull winning a Formula One, like all these amazing moments. But again, I suspect many entrepreneurs, like many sports people, have this feeling. Honestly, Georgie, all it does is give you a hunger for more. Like you want that feeling again. Unlike sport, and I guess this is quite an interesting difference between sport and business. There's no finish line. So if you win the America's Cup or don't, everyone goes off for 2 weeks and reflects, or you win the Premiership and everyone goes off on holiday. In business, if you get to 100 million revenue on December the 31st, you sort of say, Do you know what? We messed that up, didn't we? We could have got to 101." Like there's always something more that you could do. And it's quite interesting. Like one of our athletes who I've got to know well, he's an amazing guy, is Adam Peaty. And I think it's really interesting for someone like Adam, obviously is Britain's greatest ever swimmer. I don't think that's an overstatement. Uh, the mindset that Adam has to have versus, say, a footballer, where if a footballer loses a match on a Saturday, he's got to wait 3 or 4 days, 6 days maximum for the next opportunity to go and win. Whereas if Adam doesn't win what he wants to at the Olympics, he's got to wait 4 years. And mentally, when you're in the pool at 5 a.m. or you're in the gym and you're spending time away from your child or family, and it's 4 years that you're waiting to have that moment. You talk about delayed gratification, like that I personally think is truly inspiring. Whereas in business, we're really lucky. We have instant, is what we're doing working or not? Like you can see a customer's buying that product that I bought or not. So that motivation is fueled constantly because you're like, right, brilliant. This amazing moments happened, but I can directly see the impact of that. I want more. I want to see what's next. I want to see I want to see where our limits are. Let's find where our limits are. And I don't think we found those yet. And that's what keeps the alarm going off at 5 a.m. every day.
Keeps driving you forward. I'd love to talk to you forever because you're so engaging to chat to, Tom. But I know you've got to go and make your next billion somehow. So I've got to let you go. But before I do, what is like family Christmas lunch like around, your house, your table? Like, do you ever kind of stop riffing ideas between you and your brother? Is there a moment where you ever switch off?
So I do. I need to have, like, I need to turn my brain off. I need downtime. I would die otherwise. But my brother doesn't. My brother's not normal where he will, so he'll have his iPad with the revenue on the table on Christmas Day, and he'll see what we're doing, and he'll say, "Oh, we're 4% behind last year," and I'm like, "Go away! I don't care. Tell me tomorrow. Tell me in January." Whereas his brain never switches off. So, yeah, we're different in that sense. I couldn't operate without some kind of come down from the highs, whereas my brother just keeps going nonstop. Which, yeah, good on him, but it's not for me.
It's not doing you any disservice. Anyway, brilliant. Thank you so much for chatting to me. Thank you so much for making the time in what I'm sure is a crazy calendar.
No, no, really appreciate it, Georgie. Thank you for having me.
Join us for the Performance People podcast every week for the highs, lows, lessons, and stories from people like this lot. Michael Johnson,
Some days what I would see is a person who is a shell of what I used to be.
Eddie Hearn,
We don't operate in a business that's dangerous, but we just operate in one where you've got to sleep with one eye open.
Mo Farah,
It couldn't get any harder than what I've gone through, and at that point, I just kind of just went for it.
Paula Radcliffe,
You can only control yourself.
Susie Wolf.
And Toto did once liken me to a donkey.
Every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts.